Rania, we're going to keep moving forward here in the show. We want to turn to another crucially important issue, and that is the broader situation in Northeast Asia and some efforts to address the U.S. policy there in South Korea, in particular, the Republic of Korea. We are very, very happy to be joined here on the show by Jamie Tyberg, who's a Korean organizer with Nodutdol, which is just announcing a new campaign, U.S. out of Korea. So, Jamie, thank you so much for being with us here on the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to join y'all here.
Well, great to have you here. And, you all at Nodutdol are launching this new campaign, U.S. out of Korea. So just for context here, for those who maybe don't know, how extensive really is the U.S. military and related presence, in South Korea, the Republic of Korea? And, how has it been intensifying as of late?
Mm-hmm. So in South Korea alone, the U.S. military has 62 bases and 28,500 troops stationed in South Korea. These are actually just U.S. military bases in South Korea. They actually also have access to the existing South Korean military bases as well as South Korean military personnel. And they would have operational control over them in times of war. The largest U.S. military base actually is located in South Korea, the one outside of North Korea. It's in the city of Pyeongtaek. And just to offer a visual of the U.S. military presence in South Korea, these are like huge walled off sections of the city. There's repeated signs of no trespassing. Entire roads that used to be available to Korean people are blocked off now. And these military bases are also next to community centers, they're next to churches, they're next to playgrounds and schools where children are. And so they're really somatically disrupting the sense of safety that Korean people feel in their cities. The US military is also just more than the number of troops or the number of military bases. The US is deploying regularly US warplanes, nuclear submarines, heavy bombers, aircraft carriers, and they're hosting hundreds of military exercises annually on the peninsula. And these exercises even include the rehearsal of the invasion of North Korea. And in terms of intensification, we've really been seeing a major escalation by the US in Korea. Last year alone, the number of war games or the military exercises exceeded 200 days. And this is pushing the relations and the tensions in Korea and the relation between the two Koreas into a breaking point. Because of all of the increased hostility, North Korea is now completely disinterested in dialogue with the US. It's even closed the door on a peaceful reunification with South Korea, which it has pursued for decades because the South Korean government is becoming so hostile. And so now North Korea is being forced to respond with increasing their defenses. And this is putting the Korean peninsula at the highest risk of an active state of war in decades.
That's just wild to have it framed that way because, in the media and, of course, the way the U.S. government frames it, it's always that the U.S. presence in Korea is there to protect the Republic of Korea. They're just there to, make everybody safe, right? And, of course, deterring threats. So, what's the real purpose of having such a huge footprint on the peninsula if not to protect the Republic of Korea?
Mm-hmm. Before I get into the real purpose, I would say in terms of the narrative around the U.S. is there to really protect people. When I talk to my family members in South Korea or talking with the organizers in South Korea or all of the elders, one thing that is clear across class, across age, across gender is that U.S. presence does not translate to safety or security or peace. For my grandparents' generation who lived through the Korean War, they witnessed firsthand the violence of the U.S. military. They saw the number of bombs that were dropped on Korea during the Korean War, which exceeded the number of bombs that they dropped in the entire Pacific during the Second World War. And just a few weeks ago, actually, the South Korean media reported that a new CIA document has been uncovered that proves that the U.S. gave orders to bomb civilian neighborhoods in Seoul in the early days of the Korean War. And so while we are taught, if we're taught at all, that Seoul was destroyed by North Korea, now we have evidence, a CIA document as evidence that the US was the culprit that played the larger role in the destruction of Korea. But to speak to the real purpose of why is the US in Korea, I would say it's really a direct response to the sharp decline in the US's drive toward unipolar world power. They're losing power politically, they're losing power financially, they're losing power economically. The only power that they have left to exert is military power. They're seeing the emerging multipolarity under the guidance of the People's Republic of China, of Russia, the former Soviet Union. And unlike other countries that might also have some power, these two countries are huge, both in terms of population as well as land mass. So the US knows that it can't actually compete with them when it comes down to it. And China especially is surpassing the US economically. And China is also playing more of a mediating and facilitating role on the world stage politically. We saw this with Palestine when China invited the political parties of Palestine to discuss dialogue and unity. And countries in the Pacific, in Asia, particularly consider China as a source of collective economic development. So to them, the US poses a lose-lose situation, whereas integrating their economy and their country's trade, et cetera, with China offers them a win-win situation. And this is extremely, extremely dangerous for the US in protecting their interests in the region as well as their position of hegemony. And Korea happens to be situated in a strategic location where having access to the peninsula, or at least the southern part of the peninsula, allows the US to directly contest with the emerging multipolar powers. And I would also say that the US is aware that their military is stretched way too thin across the globe. I mean, it's the only country that has military command structures all over the world, all over all the different regions, all the different continents. And so it knows that without the defense alliances that it has in South Korea, Thailand, Philippines, Japan, and Australia, it would not be able to actually maintain its interest in that region.
No, I think that's critically important analysis, and and to some degree, in both what you were saying there and what your response to the first question, you've already spoken to this to some degree, but I want to speak to it a little bit more because I think it's critically important, and I know it's both historical and contemporary, but the impact on just the day-to-day lives of people in South Korea, of course, where all these U.S. troops are, but I would assume, also in North Korea as well, where if you're faced with this, undoubtedly that's affecting your day-to-day life. If you could just speak a little bit more about those kind of impacts of what this U.S. military presence is really having on people.
It's pretty mainstream and honestly has crossed over to the culture, I would say, that the US military is not a force of security and safety for people. I mean, take a look at the movie The Host, which was a huge blockbuster in South Korea as well as across the world, directed by the director of Parasite. The movie is literally about the pollution from the US military giving birth to a monster in the Han River, which then destroys the lives of regular working people in Korea. The US military has admitted to burying massive barrels of Agent Orange in South Korean soil, which, if you know anything about the environment, it's the same soil that also crosses over to the north. Groundwater in Seoul itself has been poisoned by the US military. Tons of other places where US war games and military dumping are happening have left massive amounts of carcinogens in the soil and the water. And the thing about these being US military bases is that when something happens, say like an oil spill, Korean authorities are not actually allowed access to go and investigate and try to clean up. They have to just completely resign their powers to the US military, which is not going to clean up, which is not going to take accountability for all of the damages that it is doing to the Korean environment. And just military violence is a huge topic of discussion among Korean people. Back in 2002, 2 middle school girls were killed when a U.S. forces convoy driving an armored vehicle struck and crushed them. This is left in the cultural memory of the people. And we don't have to discuss this, but we all know the U.S. military is one of the biggest institutional polluters on Earth. So whatever it's doing across the world is contributing to the accelerating climate crisis that generations of people are going to have to now suffer and deal with.
And on that note, I'm curious if you could tell us about your new campaign and what you are hoping to achieve.
Yes, absolutely. As an organization made up of Korean diaspora as well as other Asian diaspora, we understand that right now the problem is that the US is able to do whatever it wants to do in Korea without facing any domestic criticism or opposition. So the American public has been kept in the dark and completely misled about the reality of Korea. And so we're launching this campaign because, first and foremost, we're really concerned about the war and this next frontier of the Third World War or the new Cold War. We don't want any more bombs dropped on Korea. There's a genocide already happening in Palestine. There's a genocide in the Congo. We don't want another genocide in Korea. It's also not in the interest of the majority of the American people either. It only serves the American ruling class and only fills the pockets of those in the military-industrial complex. And so we want to end this era of U.S. impunity in Korea, and by doing that and through the struggle of Korean independence, we want to support and expand this broad anti-imperialist front that's really re-emerging inside the empire. And I think the first thing that we really want to achieve is just educate the masses of people on this issue, because there is so much that is forgotten or unknown about Korea and the Korean War and why the US is continuing its occupation of the Korean Peninsula. And we just want to be organized and ready to oppose the US whenever it really starts to escalate in Korea. And I want to emphasize that, again, this is not just a campaign for Koreans. It concerns everybody in the US. The situation in Korea could easily lead to nuclear war. US is actually they are actually who introduced nuclear weapons to the peninsula when they snuck in thousands of nuclear weapons to South Korea. And so it really affects everyone, and we want to call on every person in the US to oppose US imperialism in Korea, because opposing US imperialism anywhere supports the resistance to it everywhere. We're going to be launching the campaign next Saturday officially. If you are in New York or the Bay or LA, we have local events happening that you can find out through our social media. Or if you're anywhere else, our launch will be on the People's Forum YouTube page, so you can tune in that way.
Excellent. Right on. Well, we really appreciate it. And you are an organizer with Nodutdol, so hopefully people check out your social media if they want to learn more. Jamie Tyberg, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.